as we come into the end of the year. And my phone is like pinging here like crazy from you guys. First off, we had an awesome year. 2022, a lot of work got done. I don't know if such a work activity had occurred in the past, but we had 2 phenomenal committees and a third one break out. So again, for Tracy there, she has refrained from making any Chapel Hill UNC jokes, but I'm sure she had them on her at the tip of her tongue. All the work that occurred from the digital government group, just phenomenal. Jeff and the team, as we looked at cyber and have some things here as well that we're going to be moving forward with. And then the third group that we brought in, and I see Kristen's on session here as well, working with our colleagues in OSBM and some of you from the board, and trying to put together some criteria as we look at budget prioritization for IT expansion projects. So outstanding work there for this past year, which kind of leads us into our annual report review, because it's interesting that I believe this is the first time we're actually doing an annual report. And last night we were talking with Jonathan and asking the question, do we have to vote on this? We've never done this before. So we'll go ahead and let Sarah and them talk about that here in a little bit later. But the one thing that you will see is the recommendations that are in that report, along with the estimated budgetary amounts. Those were submitted as part of our agency budget expansion request to OSBM. So again, we are following through with what the ITSB committee is recommending across the different subgroups and continue to move forward in that regard. We have a couple of departures coming up here. So first and foremost, as many of you probably know already, Rob Main is retiring at the end of the month. Rob has been a 25-year employee of North Carolina, also a retired reservist from the Air National Guard as well. So Rob is stepping down. He's going to go home, be dad, be spouse, go to dance lessons with his 3-year-old daughter, and do some really cool things. And then eventually, I suspect he'll be back in the private sector or somewhere. But that's my speculation. But replacing Rob here as our interim enterprise security risk management officer is Carly Sherrod. Carly's on screen down there at the bottom. Carly's a phenomenally talented individual. When I first met her last year, actually 2021, I first came here, impressed me off the bat. Was somebody I knew we wanted to have over on our team. We were able to convince her to come over into the team. Little did she know that when she came over, all the other fun-filled activity was beginning as well. We continue to grow and evolve and mature in these processes, as you all know, over the last couple of months. But Carly is here. And Carly, if you want to say a few words, introduce yourself, please do so.
Great. Thank you, sir. Hi, everyone. Carly Sherrod. I think I've worked with several of you in some form, fashion, or another. I'm excited to be here, excited to support the interim position in the transition. So a little bit about me. I've been with state government for about 11 and a half years, started over in the UNC system with Lineberger Cancer Center, then hopped over to State Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Public Safety under emergency management doing some intelligence. And then since have shifted over into the cybersecurity space very heavily, working with the JCTF, our Joint Cybersecurity Task Force, for about 4.5 years. So really excited for the opportunities we have in spite of all the challenges and risk, I would say, sir. But happy to be here, happy to be a part of this committee, and looking forward to working with you all more closely. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. And as Carly noted, you can tell from her first opportunities here in the state, biology and healthcare administration background, and yet a prime driver in cybersecurity. So once again, we don't necessarily need folks in STEM to be able to move over into these other career fields. There are talented individuals like Carly out there that can transition very easily and do great things for us. The other announcement I want to make is Mr. Illinois himself there, Jeff, has asked to step down as chair of our cyber committee. He's still going to participate and be part of our, look at that, he's conflicted there. But anyway, he's going to continue to remain a valued member of the cyber committee, but he has a need to step down right now as chair. So we will be reaching out, and I know Rocco may be calling upon some of you. Rocco has a couple leads and ideas for follow-up. But if you do have some interest in taking over or being the cyber chair for the next upcoming year, please let Rocco and I know about your interest, and we'll go ahead and see what needs to be done. But Jeff, just want to thank you for all your work this past year and keeping everything moving forward. You guys have been extremely busy as well. And I don't know if you have any parting words there from the cyber chair perspective.
Yeah, it's been a fantastic group. Well, there is so much talent around this state. The CISOs across the agencies, brilliant people. Looking forward to the folks that are rolling in to take over. Looking forward to continuing to work with it. But I will leave everybody. We are going to miss Rob. He is truly a gifted talent. You are an amazing individual that everybody loves, a tremendous resource and asset to the state. Been a great friend and a great resource, and we're going to miss you tremendously. So it's a great group of people. This is still going to be fun for a while, years to come. And we appreciate what you do, Jim, as well. And the fact that we've got a true industry expert leading this whole organization is, again, an asset to the group. And it's an amazing group of talented people. It's fun to be around smart people.
It is. It is. So thank you very much, Jeff. And again, thank you for all your hard work over the past year on that category. Moving on and talking a little bit more about cyber real quick. Our IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment Job Act, IIJA, the cyber grant, that's $1 billion available through the federal government across the 50 states and the 4 territories. North Carolina did submit its application back on November 15th. It is still pending with FEMA/CISA for approval. But in the meantime, the committee is going ahead and moving forward. We're beginning to survey and canvass local government entities on their needs, wants, wishes, desires, and seeing how that will begin to align with what we want to do at a state strategic level. But then also there may be some things that we cannot account for at a state level, and looking at how we need to do that and fund those things a little bit differently. So more to follow on that, but right now we're just kind of in that holding pattern, awaiting approval from FEMA and CISA, and then we'll be really, I expect, in the early part of next year, really moving in earnest. Again, year one funding is about $5 million, 5 point some change that's available to the state of North Carolina. So we're going to be looking forward to getting some good work done and improving the overall security posture of our state. Were you going to say something, Jeff, or? Okay. Just to move on then, I know the agenda was shared a little bit was shared in advance here of this week, but as Murphy's Law would rule, Governor Cooper has Carly and I doing a brief for him at 10 a.m., so we will need to depart early. Rocco will drive home our agenda, but I would ask for everyone's patience as we move some things around the agenda. So what I want to talk about first is really around the annual report and be present for the discussion around the annual report and what's being contained in that annual report. And I do believe that was shared with all board members in advance. So I know we heard back from Trace, or was it Joe? I think it was Joe that we heard back from already. Yeah. So I want to go through that. And then I'm going to miss the part about the brainstorming. What I would like for us to do as a work group and as a committee, I should say, is really think about what we want to do in 2023. Obviously digital government, digital transformation is still a key priority for me. Obviously the importance of cyber is not going to go away. We've started to carve out some time for privacy. And so the role of privacy, is that something that should be separate? Should we continue to have that as part of the cyber team? What are some other things that might be of interest across the board members that aligns back to our strategic plan? So again, a whiteboard session there to get all your thoughts and inputs into that. And then lastly is for Nate Denny to come in and really talk a little bit more about what's going on in the broadband front. A lot of opportunity. His team has been rocking it, nailing it. $270 million have been committed out across the communities. 109,000 households will be getting connected. Another 3,400 businesses getting connected. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. And that's round one of our great grants. We still have $80 million. Want to go ahead and still award to other opportunities that are in play there. We know there's going to be significant money coming from the federal government as it relates to the BEAD program. So I'll let Nate talk about that in detail. But again, as all of you are centers of influence, stakeholders, key members in local communities, we need all your help to be able to effectively get the broadbands and address the digital inequity that exists here in the state of North Carolina. And so your continued cooperation, understanding, and likewise input into how we might be able to do things better is most appreciated. And we want to make sure we get that information. So with that, Sarah, I think I'm going to turn it over to you, Sarah Porper, and let's talk about the annual report, please.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Secretary Weaver. I wanted to, so you've all received the annual report, and before I get into what is in it and be here to answer questions, I just wanted to thank everybody for their support and help in writing this report. I, for one, after reviewing it again last night in preparation for tonight, this morning, am really proud and excited with some of the recommendations we're putting forward. I think they're very practical and reasonable, and they will have immediate influence and impact on the state. So thank you for your thoughtful recommendations, and thank you for helping put the report together. Julie, you can go to the next slide. So the report, I would be remiss if I did not say that we are not exactly answering the letter of the law when it comes to this report. The report asks us to prioritize enterprise initiatives. And one, we're still working on coming up with prioritization methodology. And two, there were a ton of key IT initiatives that were already underway that are very large dollar ticket items. And so prioritizing them with them already in flight wasn't really didn't seem to be beneficial to anyone. So we took a different approach. At the end of the report, we do have what those key initiatives that are already underway are, how much they cost, and their timeline. As some of them wrap up, I think prioritizing new ones will become important, but until things like the financial backbone get completely implemented, it's kind of hard to prioritize anything above those things. So that's at the end of the report. The beginning of the report talks just about board activities, particularly around the 3 groups that have been meeting this year. It's nothing, no new information in there. It's all basically what we've been reporting on all year with digital transformation, talking about the need for digital identity and one-stop shop, and having a constituent portal that everybody can use and leverage more easily. Cybersecurity and privacy, talking a lot about education pathways and whole of state. And then the IT expansion budget working group. This part, in particular, I wanted to thank the people who helped with this group, just because we're actually using the methodology this year when we're reviewing IT expansion working with the budget office for the governor's recommended budget. And the 4 lenses that you created to help us do the review have been immensely helpful. And that is outlined in the report as well. The main thing I wanted to talk about this morning were the actual recommendations. So Julie, if you can go to the next slide. There are 2 parts to our recommendations. Some of the recommendations are actually budget asks, and that's what these 4 things are. And then we'll get to the policy and the legislative changes afterward. But these were 4 key things that the board together, the different committees came up with throughout the year. None of them should be surprising to you. The constituent portal platform, particularly the one-stop shop, is something we've been talking about for a long time. We have asked for that in DIT's ask to the budget office for the governor's recommended budget. That one is critical for digital transformation to move forward in the state. It's a lot of work. It's not just work to create or implement the platform, but to do all the business process engineering and collaboration that's going to take place across all the agencies to make it come to fruition. The second one is Education Pathways Program. The way it's written in the report is it's focused as cybersecurity as the pilot, with an understanding that there are other areas like privacy that certainly we need pathways for those as well. So we've asked for funding for Education Pathways pilot for cybersecurity, which I think is more and more critical as we realize that we're not only understaffed, but we're still recognizing just how important and how much we need to put towards cyber. And then the third one is an inventory of the state's data assets. This one is critical was critical for both cyber and privacy group, but also for digital transformation. Just understanding what data assets we have, where they reside, how sensitive the data is in those different applications is something that we don't have as a state, and it becomes more and more critical as we try to protect those data assets. So there's a funding ask for that one as well. And then last, Secretary Weaver created the Privacy and Data Protection Office, and the Cyber Committee and Digital Transformation Committee both recognized how important privacy is, but we need to have funding in order to have adequate staffing for that group. So that's another thing we've asked for in the budget office, from the budget office as well. I will open this up to questions after I get through the next slide, and there are other people attending the meeting that'll have more detailed answers for you than I might. Julie, if you can go to the next slide.
It's on the
It's
legislative
there.
slide.
Good. There you go. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah.
So this slide is a group of recommendations that are not necessarily financial in nature, but need policy or legislative changes in order to make them come to fruition. The first one being wet signature. There are multiple places in general statute that require a wet signature in order to get a permit or a license or various things done in the state. And as we're moving towards digital transformation, the wet signature is, well, it prohibits that from happening successfully. So to the extent that it is possible, the board is recommending that we eliminate the wet signature in statute. I'm sure there'll still be some key areas where that'll may be necessary, but as a general rule, as we move to things online, removing the need for wet signature becomes imperative. The second one is implementing a single digital identity for a state's constituents. And this is something actually the governor is very focused on as well. He's created a working group to try to implement something in this space. And the board has identified how important it is and how much collaboration and potential legislative change will need to take place in order for a digital identity to come to fruition. And then,
Sarah,
Yep.
let me interject there. So the governor's
Absolutely.
efforts there really is focused around mobile digital identity, right? So as a state, we would like to get to a point where a digital driver's license, a mobile digital identity can be issued, but beyond just the traditional theme of a DMV, right? So from an issuance of a driver's license, there's also issuances of other licenses or permits. And then how does that relate to the bigger picture of digital identity when constituents are interacting with governmental services? So that's kind of the theme there of that work group that actually had its kickoff meeting on Wednesday of this week. Thanks, Sarah.
thank you. So the next one is the adoption of a statewide constituent portal. We have a constituent portal, but it is the way the law is currently written. It's not necessarily a case that everyone has to be on it or a part of it. And so the recommendation was so that we can have consistency and work forward with digital transformation and business one-stop shop, et cetera, that there potentially needs to be a legislative change to ensure that everybody is working from the same starting point. The next one, so both committees have asked a lot of questions about IT spend. What do we spend on this? How do we fund that? And what we've had to say on multiple occasions is we don't know, which is kind of not the best the best answer to the question, but it was an honest one. And that's because every agency has its own IT budget, does it differently. Some of it is in a specific IT fund. Sometimes it's just within the businesses themselves. And so there's very little transparency into IT spend and IT budgeting across the state. One of the recommendations from this board was to come up with a way to increase transparency. And so the recommendation is a provision that would allow for the controller of the budget office and DIT to work together to come up with a way to increase transparency. And then the last one, which also speaks to transparency, is there have been lots of questions about our application portfolio and the contracts we have and transparency around those things. And we have an enterprise portfolio management tool that can house all this information, which would allow us to make more informed decisions across the enterprise, but it's not as widely used as we would like. And so the recommendation is that the agencies should in fact leverage this tool, not only to increase our ability to see across the state, but also to help themselves in making decisions, informed decisions, and prioritizing how they're going to spend the limited resources we have. So those are the recommendations. There are a lot of them. They're all really critical to moving the state forward, particularly in cyber, privacy, and digital transformation. And we are happy to answer questions.
So as I said earlier, the only feedback I believe we've had on the report thus far came from Joe. So I don't want to sit here and assume that silence is consent. And I see Tracy has her hand up, so I'll stop there. Tracy?
Yeah, just wanted to check in to see, in particular, you had the privacy reference on maybe the first slide of what had already gone in. And I just wondered if there's anything more specific or tangible, actionable, right, or reportable about that privacy piece that could be woven through the 6 or so things that you had on the second slide. So, the appropriate adequate funding. You had already put this in, or this is just going in this time?
So Tracy, as part of our budget submission, we did put forward for some increased funding to allow for, because right now Cherie's a one-person office, if you will. And we need to get her some assistance over the next biennium to be able to be more effective in doing the role that she needs to do. And again, trying to create statewide policy around privacy and data protection and how that plays as we look at incident response opportunities, as we look at changing regulations that are constantly occurring. And we also need to focus on training, because we have a lot of people who, there's unfortunately a lot of people who believe privacy and cyber are the same word. And there are very two distinct disciplines that need to work hand in hand with each other. So we do have a funding request in for consideration into OSBM, is to be part of the governor's budget request to, over the biennium, help us build out to some degree our Office of Privacy and Data Protection. You will not see that come up as a line item in the annual report, though. That's, to me, I have that in the agency, if you want to put it the agency category, not from an ITSB aspect. When I looked at the ITSB things and what you hopefully you've all saw in the annual report, these were recommendations that came specifically from all of you on things that what we need to do and what we thought was a realistic cost or ask to try to get those implemented over the next biennium. Does that answer your question, Tracy?
Yeah, I think so. I was just
okay.
I was just trying to find out think about whether there are ways to take certain statements that are generalized, like adequate funding, right, for this office, and demonstrate or weave them through the things on the next slide that are a little bit more sort of a couple of them more serviceable and actionable, like the single digital identity right? And so I just find it's often important to connect together, right? The things that people otherwise think are amorphous with the
Okay.
things
So
absolutely.
Tracy,
You think I guess I'm getting it like mobile driver's license and single identity. Those just feel like ones that are just ripe for clarifying. Unless we've done the other thing with that is amorphous, these are not going to be able to be achieved in a consistent and safe way. Sorry.
So
Sorry to go.
Tracy, I didn't mean to interrupt. I would just say thank you for that feedback. One of the benefits of going over this report now is that it's not due until the beginning of January, and so that's a good point. We do have the opportunity to add information in the other sections to make it tie together and basically sell better. So thank you.
Yeah, and Tracy, just what I want to be careful of though is, no different than ESRMO. There's no single shout out for ESRMO. I mean, under statute, that falls under my authority, no different than the Privacy Data Office does as well. So there's that balancing act there that we need to do. But your point's very well taken as we look to expand out, and that's part of our problem is Cherie can't be everywhere. Right, we have a number of significant initiatives that are underway, things the boss would like to see get done over the last 2 years of the administration. Privacy is obviously going to have a role in that, and we just need to kind of help Cherie get some bodies to help her go ahead and do some of these activities. She can't do it herself.
Mr. Secretary.
Yes.
Comment, and just one of the things, and we've had some offline conversation about this that will help on the ask for funds on the data privacy area. It's the relationships with two key people, that being the senior appropriation chairs, one in the Senate being Senator Bretton Jackson, and then in the House, Representative Jason Saine. Those two need to have some insight. And basically, when we go for an ask, obviously the aggregate amount of money is going to be important, but just to say we need $40 million for privacy gets very difficult typically for legislators to get behind because they want to know what. So it's, the ability to substantiate it, break it out at least a project level, if you will, that says, okay, this is the initiative or the project. This is the description of what it is. This is the funding request for it. This is an overall resource requirement. These are the benefits, who benefits. This is the deliverables, and all of that in like a half page or less type of thing. This is not great detail, but it's enough detail that they wrap their arms around it and go, okay, there's 7 initiatives, and part of that requires we're going to have to hire 23 people, and it takes $37.5 million in appropriated funds, and that's how you're going to get it sold.
Not to disappoint you, Jeff, we're not looking for $37.5 million, although Cherie would gladly take it if you could write her a check out today. Nor are we looking for 37.5 bodies either. But
yeah,
we do have it broken out as to what our ask is and how we're looking to stagger that a little bit, because as you know as well, as we're trying to onboard, and this is where we kind of need some FTEs and some contractors. I think there's a good mix there. But what we can't do is, get to the point where we have a budget and it's taking us 6 to 9 months to onboard employees. We just lost another half a year to 3/4 of a year. And so we're looking at this thing a little bit strategically, even across all our ask here from an agency budget aspect of how do we balance the appropriateness of state employees versus the leveraging of contractors, so we're able to move quickly and effectively once a budget is passed, because we know there's a number of initiatives here. So we do have that kind of broken out a little bit. Cherie has a thought process that's been outlined in our budget expansion request, that kind of how we would onboard, what comes first, what could she look at, et cetera, et cetera. And she's nodding her head there. So I think we're in a good place. We're at a point now where we have to go ahead and move forward and really walk the walk now, right? We need to get some sustainable funding to enable the Privacy Office to continue to grow in what's the word I'm looking, in proportion with the activity that's occurring across our state.
Sure. Data privacy, obviously, the fact that you brought it to the attention and Cherie being on board, I mean, it's absolutely critical that we staff this, address it, deal with it head on. It's like cyber. Nobody worries about it until somebody's been hacked. Their privacy has been taken, data disrupted. But it's great to see your leadership and the leadership of creating this area that will protect the citizens of the state. But, legislators don't see it until something bad happens. So they've got to understand and appreciate being proactive is much better than being reactive to problems in this area.
Okay, thank you, bud.
Yep.
Other questions, concerns? And again, like I said, I mean, silence means consent. We did ask Jonathan last night, do we need to actually vote on this? Because I don't think we've ever done a vote. I think the answer was no, we really don't need a vote. We just everybody had their opportunity to review it. Please, if you have not done so, review it, get comments, feedback back to Sarah so we can get this report finalized. But really, at the end of the day, this is the first time we're doing this. So to Sarah's comment, we may not be answering the letter of the law, but we are making an attempt of doing something. And I believe that'll at least get some recognition. And again, talk about all the great work all of you have done over 2022. So, and hopefully we'll continue to do this and do, I don't want to say do more work in 2023, but continue to build on our success. Let's put it that way and continue to move the state forward. Any other questions, comments, concerns?
So Jim, just wanted to clarify, if you will, or if someone can answer. So it's a hard deadline. We're going to submit this on January 1st. So we've got like 2 weeks to finish up any kind of review.
Sarah, I'll defer that one to you, ma'am.
The date is on or before January 1st in statute. So yes, we would like to submit it on or before that.
If it gets submitted on January 3rd, I don't think anybody will panic.
Correct.
Better than last year, right?
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, we're well ahead of schedule last year. And we know the holidays are upcoming, obviously, as well. But this was our board meeting, so we were trying to get things out to all of you in advance of the board meeting. Any other questions? Okay, great. Then we'll go ahead and is Nate on? I think I see Nate.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Nate, how about if I turn it over to you, sir, and you give us a great update on broadband, sir?
No pun intended, I'm sure, Mr. Secretary. Thank you all for the time to speak with you today. I'll do a little briefer of a report because I think I've done a couple of deep dives the last 2 meetings. So I'll just give you kind of a quick snapshot of where we stand over in the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity. As you'll recall, last November, the governor signed into law a budget that appropriated more than $1.036 billion in American Rescue Plan and state funding to the mission to close the digital divide. And of course, our digital divide approach involves investing in extension of infrastructure to folks' homes, making sure that they can afford the devices and the service, and that they have the devices and skills necessary to participate fully in the digital economy. We have now awarded more than 26% of that initial appropriation. We have awarded $270 million through the state's GREAT Grant program. That is out of a $350 million federal appropriation or state appropriation of federal funds. Those awards address 95 grants in 93 counties across the state. So nearly every county that has participated or is eligible for funding has a GREAT Grant award. And the awards cover 113,000 locations statewide. So we've really taken a tremendous bite out of the unserved population through that GREAT Grant program. We have about $80 million left in GREAT Grant funding from the American Rescue Plan. We've also got about $40 million in state funding that we're going to leverage, since we've got these high quality applications that result in fiber projects in excess of 100 megabits per second symmetrical service, and with full commitments to participate in the Affordable Connectivity Program. We would like to just address as many of those good applications as possible. we're in the grant agreement phase right now. So we will be sending our grantees, our awardees, grant agreements to sign on that will start the 2-year clock for them to build out. They will receive those grant agreements in the next couple of weeks. One major area of focus for us has been negotiating with U.S. Treasury and other federal agencies around the applicability of the uniform guidance that governs federal grants to private sector entities. And I won't get too far in the weeds here. If you're really interested in it, chat me and I can give you a whole essay on it. But we've been basically making sure that the federal compliance model works for North Carolina's model for broadband infrastructure deployment, given that we rely here on private sector entities largely, as well as our rural electric and telephone membership cooperatives. Once those grant agreements are in place, we'll be able to lock in specific locations on our map, which I will share the link for this group so you can see all the locations statewide that have gotten a great grant award or benefiting from a great grant award. We'll be able to lock that map in and then go back to remaining applicants and carve out granted locations from those applications and give each of them a chance to stay in the pool if they'd like, right? They have to amend their applications so that we don't double fund any specific locations or score them with locations that are already receiving federal funding. So again, once those grant agreements are finalized in January, then we go back through, kind of restack, rescore, and award additional grants in several rounds and kick off the Completing Access to Broadband program, which is our state and county partnership model. Excuse me. We'll be working directly with counties, and I know I've told this board about that program a couple of times, but just to refresh your memory, we'll be working directly with counties to issue statements of work to a pre-negotiated, pre-qualified list of internet providers to go out and address remaining unserved and some underserved locations. So not only those that lack 25 megabits per second download, 3 megabits per second upload speeds, what the FCC calls broadband speed internet, but also those that are somewhere between 25.3 and 100 megabits down, 20 megabits upload, which is our overall target for the state. So again, that program will launch in the first couple of months of 2023 once we've got all these great grant locations locked in and we're really able to zone in with county governments in direct partnership with them to identify remaining locations. And again, that's all work in the context of the American Rescue Plan funds that we've received so far. We also are in the process of drawing down BEAD funds. This is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's a $42 billion program that North Carolina will get a formula share of. For what it's worth, our initial conservative estimates were that North Carolina would be entitled to about $800 million in addition to our American Rescue Plan investments through that BEAD program. We've seen a couple of estimates in the last couple of weeks that actually pushed that number up in excess of $1 billion. So this is a second major influx of federal funding that we can use to really address this problem once and for all. We have secured our initial $5 million BEAD planning grant that kicks off our 5-year plan that we have to submit to draw down those funds. We've got 9 months to develop that. And we've also brought in a $1.4 million planning grant for digital equity that will help us do a 5-year plan around those aspects of adoption that we've talked about a lot, right? So access to devices, the affordability of service, and so on and so forth. So our Office of Digital Equity and Literacy has kicked off that digital equity planning effort. And one thing that I think is important to know for this group is that both the infrastructure pot of funds and the digital equity pot of funds require really extensive, thorough stakeholder engagement across across the state during that 9 months to a year that we'll be working on those 2 reports. So we'll be doing listening sessions. We've actually just shared our external engagement plan with the National Telecommunication Information Administration that administers both pots of funds. So we'll be doing a really comprehensive outreach effort, traveling all over the state. And I'd like to make sure that members of the strategy board have access to that calendar as those dates firm up and get a chance to join us at some of those stakeholder events. I know several of you have been very active leaders on this issue and very engaged with us, and so we'd love to have you in those conversations where possible. The other major moving piece for us on the infrastructure side is the new FCC broadband maps. You will recall that the old maps are trash, to put it lightly. They overstate the levels of connectivity statewide and make it harder for us to zoom in beyond that census block level. The FCC released its first draft new map a couple of weeks ago, and it's not a ton better. It still kind of misstates our levels of connectivity. So we'll be working through the challenge process to both submit bulk challenges from the department that add more addresses that we know are unserved or underserved into that pool, and working directly with communities and residents on how to submit challenges where the FCC says that their service is where they have service, but they actually do not. So that's going to be our major challenge between now and January 13th, is to get as many of those challenges locked in with the FCC so that we have an accurate assessment of who's got service and who doesn't. And I will share with all of you the link to that FCC challenge process, and so that you can see how it works directly. You can go in and say, well, you say that I've got, gig symmetrical fiber service, but I'm working on fixed wireless here at a lower upload speed, and you can put that in directly. We'll also be doing a video demo that walks people through that process, because it can be a little confusing, and we'd love your help getting that out to your networks. 2 last things I'll mention on the digital equity side of the house. We have now concluded the application process for our initial $10 million interagency digital equity grant program. We have received, reviewed, and scored our 27 eligible grant applications. I think the applications came in well in excess of $40 million, so we're not going to be able to fund everything we initially received, but this will help us work with partner agencies like Department of Public Instruction, Natural and Cultural Resources State Library Program, and so on and so forth, around programs and partnerships directed at solving the problems we've identified around access to telemedicine, homework gap, and so on and so forth. We will launch in the next couple of months our phase 2 grant program that will be open to a broader range of potential applicants, including municipal governments, county governments, local nonprofits, and so on, for projects focused on the affordability and adoption pieces. And then last, I always like to point out where North Carolina stands on the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is that $30 a month subsidy. North Carolina now has 645,000 enrollees in that program. We are still the 5th highest raw number of enrollees among states, but also 5th in terms of percentage of eligible population that is enrolled. So we are feeling better about our work to get the word out across that program, but still have a lot of work to do to get where we need to be in terms of the addressing the 1.3 million North Carolinians who are eligible. We have just distributed more than 1,500 flyers through the Durham and Orange County Social Services Department Thanksgiving meals to try and get words out to the eligible population, and are launching a 14-county pilot initiative to focus our outreach in partnership with the Hometown Strong team. So those are the major updates for us. I know it was very quick, covered a lot of ground, but happy to answer any questions from the strategy board. And again, thank you all. Thank you, Chair, for hearing us today.
So Nate, just a quick question here, and you mentioned about the overstating the connectivity of the new FCC map. So correct me if I'm wrong here in my numbers. It still focuses on 25.3 speeds. It's still census block related data, and it has now North Carolina at 98.5%, right?
It is not census block data.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
It still does have the same 25.3 threshold. You can actually slice it up to get higher speed thresholds for the data too. We're having a little bit of trouble with the bulk downloads. We've been going through a licensing process with FCC's mapping vendor, CostQuest, to try and get access to that data. But you can zoom in on specific locations. The major challenge that we've identified thus far is that it lumps in satellite service and a few other types of service that inflate our numbers. And so it would suggest that, with the flawed prior draft of FCC maps, it said that 95.5% of North Carolinians have access to that 25.3 speed threshold, and the new and improved maps say 98% of North Carolina does, so which we know is not the case. So again, we're trying to carve that data up a little bit and go through that protest process. And again, the maps, what the FCC calls in terms of locations, unserved or underserved, won't be a problem for us in our actual deploying resources to address those locations. It will be a problem for us in negatively affecting our overall allocation. So North Carolina's share of that $42 billion pot comes from our share of the nation's unserved locations. So we need to make sure the FCC has the largest possible number of unserved locations in North Carolina to make sure we're able to draw down as many resources as the state is entitled to in that program.
Hey, thank you for that. We got Secretary Cashwell.
Secretary Cashwell?
Yeah.
Hey, good morning, you all. Thank you, Nate, for
Good
that
morning.
update. Just a couple of quick questions. So sticking with the FCC maps, as you know, we have a number of stakeholder groups here at DOA that could probably be helpful in that process. Andrea Harris, Equity Task Force, Commission of Indian Affairs, Council for Women, a number of different groups and areas where we provide grants in rural communities. We can do it offline, but other people I would like some specificity around how exactly, is the best way for us to get that out with good instructions for people regarding what it is they need to do, because we can definitely help get that information out to rural areas in particular and to stakeholder groups that have contacts in rural areas. So that's the first one. And I don't know if you want to respond or I can just keep going with my questions.
Just to say thank you, and I'll make sure that our team reaches out with each of those task forces or councils to help get that word out. Thank you.
Okay. Second question is, when do you anticipate the state grants, the state agency grants will be announced?
I believe they have not been announced yet. I actually have a meeting this afternoon to go through recommended awardees, so I suspect we'll announce shortly after the holidays.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And
we were targeting hopefully this week, as I said, at cabinet, but it's going to be delayed a little bit. So sorry about that.
That's okay. And then finally, on the Affordable Connectivity Program, I was recently at a conference out in California, and there was a full workshop on the Affordable Connectivity Program. And one of the things that they indicated is that, I don't have to tell you all, that it can be very difficult for people to get their eligibility recommendation, or whatever the appropriate term is, from the feds to determine that they are actually eligible for the program. And what they were indicating is that in some parts of the country, providers, AKA a Spectrum, are actually signing individuals up, assisting in that process of helping individuals get signed up. And I know that we've had a number of people at various board meetings say, that relatives have tried to get into the program and they know that they meet the criteria, but they never hear back from the feds and those sorts of things. So I don't know. I just want to, for awareness, first of all, if you are not hearing that, that is definitely something that we are hearing from communities here in North Carolina, as well as nationally at this national conference I was at. And the way in which that has been addressed in some states is that providers are assisting in that process.
Yes, some providers certainly are. What we are hearing, what has turned out to be most effective so far is a number of providers have committed already to a $30 a month offering that amounts to effectively free service once you've gone through that ACP program. Those providers in particular are doing a very strong, a good job of signing folks up. You're right, the process is too complicated. I think we've got a couple of digital navigator projects intended to create resources that help educate folks about that process and walk them through it in a pretty hands-on way. And my hope is that a number of our applications for that interagency digital grant process address that, whether it's through state libraries or other resources. So I think you'll see more from our team about how to navigate that process in the near future. The last thing I'll say is working with a couple of state agencies to help share state data about eligibility criteria with the FCC so that there is a better shared source of eligibility to expedite those individual determinations. Eligibility for the ACP is tied to a number of different programs, including the food stamp program, other kind of low income determinative federal and state programs. So we're working on making sure that state government's talking to federal government wherever possible to help make that eligibility determination run more smoothly.
Okay, quick follow-up, if I may. One is, you mentioned that you have navigated. Do you already have, you will have more. So does that mean you already have some navigators in place who are available to assist people? One, and then final thing, and I promise I'll be quiet after this, is in terms of the providers you mentioned who are, sort of going the extra mile, can you share who those particular providers are?
In terms of the digital navigators, there are a number of entities that have already stood up digital navigation programs across the state. The Center for Digital Equity out of Charlotte has a great program that they're actually making available in some cases outside of Charlotte, tied to Charlotte's 2-on-1 program. We don't have anything like that yet. We're in the process of building something similar that I hope to be able to update you on by the next quarterly meeting. In the meantime, we're trying to drive folks to those existing programs and invest in them where we have the opportunity. So more to come on the Digital Navigator. I think Annette Taylor, who runs the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy, is, I think, actually advertising for a Digital Navigator role on her team right now that will help provide that support to other local organizations across the state. So more to come there. In terms of providers that are doing a lot in terms of outreach, I wouldn't want to start and fail to completely describe a list of those right now, but I can get you some examples of that. So I will make sure that we follow up with the board on that. But it's a great question. Thank you, Secretary Cashwell.
Nate, I have one question I'd like to go back and review with you. You had mentioned that I guess FCC had said 95%, and now we're talking about 98%. And we know that's flawed. What do you think the reality is in terms of those that are being served on a percentage basis across the state?
We don't have the specific number we need on that yet. The best estimates we've seen have been in the kind of high 80s range, right? We know there's a lot of expanding infrastructure now. There's going to be a lot more just because of the sheer number of grants we've awarded now. Of course, those will take a 2-year construction period before all of those folks are online. But we know we're shrinking this problem quickly, right? But again, absent better, more granular data from the feds that is accurate, we're still estimating, right? But I think our mapping team, working with the GICC, the Geospatial Group at the Government Data Analytics Center here in DIT, is working with county governments and their 911 data to get a better updated address map, and pairing that, I think, ultimately with a building footprint study, all of which is going to help us drive better, again, more granular snapshots of who's got service and who doesn't, so that we should be able to answer that question sooner rather than later. We're also pushing providers to give us more. We've got one provider has already given us just a full list of subscriber locations, which is excellent. So we're going to be pushing additional providers to share their actual FCC submission so that we can basically replicate that map, but more accurately.
Okay. It sounds like the delta might be on the order of 15%, maybe 20%. It's not wrong by 50% or a bigger number, right?
I think that's right.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Nate, a couple questions. And this is just an overview. You know, obviously the focus on the unserved and underserved. Do you have a sense on the balance, the proportion between what's focused on the rural community versus the lower income, unserved urban population?
Are you asking how the levels of connectivity or disconnectedness?
Yeah, the percent of the grant money, is it going 80% to rural centers and parts of the state, or is it equally split with the urban, or is it focused totally on the urban? I just don't have a sense where the program.
All of the great grant awards to this point have been in totally unserved locations. Most of those unserved locations are in rural areas, not all, right? And so we've seen
so when you define unserved, you're talking about there's no availability of broadband service. Is that what you're saying?
Unserved meaning locations that lack any access to 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up speeds.
Right.
Those are more heavily concentrated in rural counties. If you look at our distribution of grants across economic distress tiers 1, 2, and 3,
right,
we've actually gotten pretty even now. You recall that started with just tier 1 economically distressed counties, and we've slowly grown it. So what you'll see, at this point, Wake, Durham, Guilford all had great grant successful awards, but kind of on the outer edges of the county, right? The more rural areas or ex-urban portions of what are largely urban counties. Mecklenburg actually had no great grant applications this time. We suspect that will change in the future, but we're still largely talking about rural counties or rural pockets in urban or suburban counties.
Right. And do you have a sense of what the percentage of the remaining funds, the two main buckets, have available for allocation and award going forward?
The Great Grant Program has about $80 million in federal funding remaining for award, and about $40 million in state funding available for award. Again, both of those should happen in the first couple of months of the new year. The CAB program now has $400 million available.
So what percent would you say is remaining then? We've allocated a bunch of it then.
Just in the infrastructure bucket, we've allocated $270 million out of about forgive me for doing math in my head real quick, about $740 million.
Okay. Perfect. And the entities that are examples that are winning the awards and those you anticipate, will they be different? Are they all business enterprises that provide the service? Are there any individuals that are actually trying to seek award?
In all of our infrastructure programs, the applicants are internet providers. Now, they
Okay.
could be large publicly traded internet providers, small businesses, or rural and electric and telephone membership cooperatives, but they're all kind of in that immediate spectrum. And we anticipate that'll be the case throughout the delivery of great grants, the Completing Access to Broadband program, and the Stopgap Solutions program.
Any of the major big boys refusing to go into certain geographic areas because of not enough market?
Right now, the Great Grant program is pretty reactive, as you know. Applicants come to us and apply for it, right? I'll say, so no one could be forced into an area, right, or refuse it. Now, we can see where the demand is, but I'll say the two largest applicants under the Great Grant program, and again, across urban, suburban, and rural counties, are two major publicly traded providers, right? So I think that Brightspeed, formerly CenturyLink, was our largest great grantee, and I believe Charter was second.
Good.
But we also had really strong participation from co-ops and other small providers too.
Great. Appreciate the information. Spectacular.
Absolutely.
Nate, one more question. So, let's see, has all of the opportunity been, exposed? Are there going to be any more service providers that are going to be able to make application? Is this an ongoing thing, or has the window on all of that closed and you're just working with the universe of folks who have previously responded?
The Great Grant applications are in. We got about 305 applications. We've awarded 95 of those so far. We had a very small handful that weren't eligible, but the remaining basically 200 Great Grant applications are all still eligible for award. Now, again, as we execute grant agreements with existing providers, you will have a number of those remaining Great Grant applications that include areas that have already been funded and thus have to be pulled out of those applications. But all of those are still in the pool. The Completing Access to Broadband program, those will be new statements of work issued to all interested providers that can or do provide service in a given county. So that'll be a whole new solicitation process.
So a new entrant, so there'll be an opportunity if there were a new entrant to be able to make application.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I apologize to the board. I've got a hard stop that it turns out was 7 minutes ago. So I do need to probably conclude my Q&A portion, but I'll make sure my email address and phone number in the chat. Board members, please don't hesitate to reach out. A number of you take advantage of that already. I would encourage the rest of you to do it. Always glad to talk about this project. Thank you all.
Thank you. Okay, so Jim, having left the meeting, I would say that where are we on our agenda for today at this point?
Rocco, the next thing we were going to do is ask the board members to brainstorm a work plan for 2023, any priorities of what they want to make sure the board works on or things they want to stop doing that they're currently doing.
Okay. So, board folks, do we have anybody that has wants to kick off and has something that they think needs to be a top priority?
Well, I'll chime in for the cyber side as we hand off. I think how we bring the Education Pathways initiative to life. Two things that I would love to see that give us a foundation is there's an entity and an organization out of Greensboro, which is a predominantly African-American company that's big time in this, that's interested in kind of being a pilot to help engage in bringing those resources. We know we have about 26,000 open positions in cyber just in North Carolina alone. So how do we work both and in the community college system, which is probably the predominant share, a little bit less in the UNC system, but also with our businesses where we can create apprenticeships, internships, what have you, and start filling that pipeline. So actually see productivity. So that initiative, collaboration in that environment would be one thing. The other thing, which I think we have a unique opportunity to do around the education pathways, is engaging with the HBCUs. I think if we could open a conversation with Deidre Trent, Deidre, classmate of mine, she was the education secretary for the state of Virginia. She's now the head of kind of the HBCUs. She was appointed by Biden, is now works out of the White House on all things HBCU. And since we've got 5 HBCUs in the UNC system, as well as I think 11 total in the state, there's an opportunity for us to create a little bit of a focus and a pathway to link all this, again, to start filling all these cyber jobs coming out of even high school, potentially some, but also through, 4-year or trade certification. So there's some specific ways. I think if we get focused, we can start seeing this thing come to life, what we're trying to do. So I'd love to see that take the next step.
So Jeff, something interesting I was thinking about while Nate was talking about the GREAT program and of course our continued focus on cyber. So I wonder if there's a partnership opportunity. One of the things with delivering high-speed internet to those that haven't had it before, certainly that's a good thing. One risk is now they have high-speed exposure to the cyber.
Yeah.
So I don't know if part of that program there might be an add-on later where we partner with providers to package cyber products with the broadband service and or educational opportunities for those users that are citizens that are benefited from the GREAT program.
I think that education and benefit makes absolute sense. I mean, I'll be the classic. So here's the, the cobbler's kids. I quit paying for the McAfee protection security stuff on our home stuff just because I got lazy. They kept update. And I said, nah, we're not getting exposed. 2 days later, my wife's hacked and we're got an $1,800 bill paying somebody's hotel bill somewhere on the credit card. And it's like, okay, nope, you got to stay current. I know better, shouldn't let it happen. So yes, all of those things, really important that we try to do and even provide the education where we're giving, once we give them access.
Tracy, Joe, any comments related to digital transformation going forward? Keith?
I don't know of anything that hasn't already been outlined as a priority. I mean, I think the document outlined where we need to focus. I think the updates that we've gotten on digital efforts and focus to date makes a lot of sense. So I'm not necessarily a fan of changing or adding. I think I would be a fan of doubling down, doing the things well that are already on the plan before taking on more.
Sure.
Yeah, and chiming in, I'm with Joe on that. I think we've highlighted priorities. I think there are places where if you wanted to drill down, we could, right? Especially areas like digital identity that we've spent a heck of a lot of time talking about, and that at some point we've talked about doing that together or engaging together with the cybersecurity group, since that's one of the areas that overlaps is identity and cybersecurity. But again, those are not changes to what's already been defined. As we talk about HBCUs, the only one that does come to mind has been a separate conversation I've been having at a national level and then also at the state level with MCNC, and that is the potential of there's an activity called EduRoam. And what EduRoam does is when Duke has a wireless network and we enable EduRoam, anyone else who has a wireless network that uses EduRoam is automatically then able to use the Duke network with no further provision of credentials and no special steps. And so this is used to incredible effect across universities throughout the country. So I will travel to a conference at another university and I never have to do anything. All of a sudden I have fantastic Wi-Fi. Guilford has, UNC Guilford has already piloted something like this with K through 12 in their county. And the conversation I've been in was at a national level around, EduRoam and a potential pilot with minority serving institutions, and then carrying that forward a little bit with MCNC and some other grants that we've been able to get from the NSF to try to help provide research capabilities for the HBCUs in the state and some of the smaller colleges and universities and under-resourced institutions. So it's a little ill-formed, but there might be an ability to really think about as we aim at broadband, think about the things that a program like EduRoam could do for being connectivity beyond the home. There are some states that have tried to push it out in their local airports or with local municipalities. So I think there's some power there and potential. I would not describe it yet as ready for a work plan of 2023, but it could be really an interesting thing for us to think about at the state. And if we could somehow knit together what's already happened at universities with what might happen in at community colleges in K through 12 and in the municipalities, we could think about the state of North Carolina becoming a place where people have access to broadband nearly anywhere and everywhere, rather than, only when they're at home.
Interesting.
And just to add to both of them, I'm under the same thought around not expanding the work plan, but I do think there are a number of efforts that we need to continue to do internally that will help drive the transformation of services, as well as digital transformation, the use of digital solutions there. And I think they're much more fundamental and maybe even grassroots, and that is like enumerating all repeatable operational processes that every agency repeats but doesn't necessarily use as a standard, right? Or things like reusable access to data through a library of APIs. I mean, obviously those are two different dimensions, but I think the work plan is solid. It's really about getting granular in actual work, not done by the committee, but supporting that effort, either being led by DIT or a partnership with all the agencies. I mean, even employee onboarding, I know that sounds silly, but employee onboarding is a hardship that every state agency is going through right now. It takes far too long. We're in a competitive market. We've talked about this. We're in a competitive market in Raleigh, and if it takes us 4 months to recruit and onboard, where it takes, Apple, Google, Red Hat 2 months, we lose that candidate, right? And so what we must do is we must look at our processes, and we must optimize those processes to become more efficient in our government activities. So that's my soapbox.
Yeah, one last area on the initiative that's already on the table and to see it can expand is the whole estate area. And, one of the things is where we spend time focusing, and I don't mean to speak out of school, but kind of the weakest link. And I think where it would be great to assess and ensure that we've addressed this is starting at the counties and working with Randy Kress and that group, and let's make sure that level is completely up to speed. And obviously the smaller counties, less resources, probably where we need to start.
So Jeff and Tracy and Jeff, obviously at the end of the month, this won't be yours to have to try to work through, but whoever is going to succeed you. But what do you folks feel like is going to be an appropriate number of meetings, or how are we going to continue to involve both committees? And is there going to be an opportunity, or would there be some value in there being a joint committee meeting to discuss things like privacy? I mean, I know we talk about it in both camps, and we get together obviously every 3 months now and talk about it, but is there going to be some value in maybe one of the monthly meetings that we get all of the committees of both committees together just to talk about a couple of topics where we have the intersection of these things?
I was
Right.
waiting for Jeff to unmute and he was waiting for me to unmute. We're both trying to wait each other out here. I think it's there's a good opportunity for the overlap piece. And it might be that it's kind of a mid-year thing we should try to do a check-in on, right? And for each of our groups, again, recognizing there's also the quarterly cadence for the ITSB meetings, but if there's a meeting in, for example, June that both our groups have, and we use that as a chance to just schedule one and be thoughtful about the overlapping aspects. I would extend that even beyond our two, right? And ask whether it's something we should do, with the third group that helps to do, right, some of the priorities and the larger strategic, right, and funding questions there.
Yeah, and I would chime in and agree with Tracy on that. At some point, there's surely so much stuff that needs to be done. We cross a point where we need to consider a third committee that's exclusively focused on privacy. It's such a big deal, but it's also resource contained, and it's also how many people in the committee have time, and where do we have resource to really address it.
Okay. Folks, a brainstorming session. Anybody else have a topic they'd like to bring up? Not all at once. Okay. Well, sounds like we're at the point here where we are wrapping up on the brainstorming session.
One thing I'll throw out, Rocco, and this is more for a future board meeting, at some point talking about the organizational structure of IT across the state. This will be somewhat controversial, but one of the intents when we created these and elevated the CIO, state CIO and DIT to a secretary position was always the intent that we'd change the reporting structure, that this agency CIOs would be a direct line to the state CIO and a dotted line back to their agency secretaries, which is obviously still the reverse. At some point, we get so much duplication or replication, we get that, and we have no way to really accurately understand and quantify the IT spend across agencies, because a lot of it happens independent of each other. At some point, it would be worthwhile for this group, the oversight board, to look at, make recommendations on how we improve that, or even change the organizational structure of DIT. I just think there's a role that DIT at a state level needs to be just that, the coordinating point for everything beyond just the plumbing, if you will, and the infrastructure. And there's a way to need to do that operationally, so you don't make it. It's not to make everything centralized. It's not to slow down decision making in the agencies and priority setting, but it's a way to work in orchestration and collaboration of getting IT resources across the state. So it's a pretty important topic that I know at least the legislators in the past have wanted to grapple with and deal with.
It sounds like an
Hey, Jeff,
opportunity.
it's
Try
a
to
great.
Yeah.
Sorry, this is Tracy, just wanting to chime in and double down on that. There were a lot of things we talked about over the last year and the prior year regarding activities and priorities for digital transformation that really require a level of connection and commitment that's shared not just by DIT but at the agency level. And so and at the end of the day, many of the digital transformation changes need to come from those agencies. And so one of the things we talked a lot about is how do we make sure that that those are synced up. We've in digital transformation been trying to do it through some level of influence and just broadening the engagement. So inviting people from other agency offices to our DT meetings, trying to incorporate their priorities within our DT plan. But if there were a way to make that a little bit of a stronger link in the setting of the strategy and the personnel and their prioritization, that I think we would find that digital transformation could happen faster and more smoothly.
Yeah.
This is Pam. I have a question. Jeff, I think you said that it's obviously currently the reverse, and I don't know if by that you mean that all CIOs report directly to the agency head and are a dotted line to DIT. That's incorrect. Not every agency works that way.
Well, I know it's
For
not
sure.
every, but it is. If
Okay.
you go to all the big five, as an example, unless it's changed in the last couple of years. I mean, I had breakfasts every other week with the top 6 CIOs and the state CIO, and none of them reported to the state CIO. And that's DOR, DHHS, going down the list, NCDOT. Now there's
No,
so
DOT does. I report directly to Jim. This is Frank Wynn.
okay.
And
So
Glenn
there's
also for DPS.
so now we have precedent to start migrating that if we're already doing some of that, which is good, I think.
We did it in 2018. DPS is also directly under Jim.
Was Eric then reporting prior to being the secretary, when he was CIO? Did he report to?
No, Eric was secretary at DIT when we migrated over in 2018.
Okay, so he started the movement. That's good. And we need to see more of that, right? So how do we proliferate that, expedite it? At least that's my view. Now, I'm sure there's people and secretaries that will disagree, right?
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear that not all CIOs.
Yeah, I knew not all of them did.
to
I didn't know some of the big ones that already started moving, which is a positive. So all helpful. And it would be good to become current. Where are we in that structure, right? So there's some background that we all need to be brought up to speed. Would be helpful.
And Jeff, this is Jonathan. I think what you've really highlighted is an issue, because while Frank and DPS and other agencies have been optimized according to statute, it still feels really half-baked. And when you start reading the statutory requirements, one of the issues that we are facing at DIT is that the money remains well, I shouldn't speak for the secretary, but that the money remains with the agencies. And then we have MOUs in place so that Frank becomes a DIT employee who's paid by DOT, but functions at a DOT space. And right. And then we even have in our own meetings where someone will even question, I heard at our retreat, your boss, Secretary Boyette, to Frank the other day. Right. I mean, It was just, it certainly is half-baked still.
And that's, again, just saying that's an issue that probably should be on the table. It's a little bit of the elephant in the room, and we probably should address it and clarify it. And, so I second what Tracy had mentioned. If we're going to expedite a lot of the stuff like digital transformation, stuff's got to be orchestrated and coordinated, right?
So Jeff, Tracy, anyone else, how would is this another committee, or is this one of the existing committees that tries to take some of this on? It's one thing to talk about it, it's another thing to execute.
My first reaction to this is not another committee. This is our committee's job to help, but it really needs to be broader than the committee taking it on. It's going to need to be the CIOs and these agency secretaries. I mean, and it crosses over because at some point, most of these are executive branch. So we need to make sure, how the governor, whoever's sitting in that role, it's a little bit independent who's sitting in it, right? It should be, but there's going to be preferences. So, but I think it's our committee to own it because we're not that big anyway. I don't think it's creating a task force work group that's at least comprised of us. If that goes on into that detail, that probably has to come out operationally out of the organization and people itself. And I'm just talking out loud. I don't have the answer. I don't know.
Yeah, here, Jeff, when you're talking about committee, you're talking about the full ITSB, right? Not one of our subcommittees or, yeah, I'm with you. It impacts what we're doing at the subcommittee, at the committee level. But it is part and parcel with exactly what, I think the state looked to this board to do. So I don't even see it as going to a committee, Rocco, but rather being, a topic or a thread that runs through several meetings, and that whether that means inviting those, executive, right, leaders, agency heads to a conversation, or to start working with this body to explore, whether it means, as I think Glenn put in the chat, how do we start to socialize and engage with the IT leaders so they don't feel like it's been done to them? I think all those are that could be a year's worth of work of 2023 for this committee, if we were really going to be intentional about it.
And maybe, Tracy, the same thing I did is it's not a committee, it's the board, right? Just in clarification, to be clear, it's the board's responsibility to probably engage and work through this. And you're not going to do that in 3 meetings a year and get this accomplished. And Russell,
well, obviously going to take a lot of engagement with all of each agency, and I think, aren't there some 29 or 30 some odd?
Anybody know the exact total number of agencies, departments there are? Total CIOs across the state? I mean, I think it's over 30. Because 7 years ago, I collected all this strategic systems plans requested them and collected almost all of them. And there were at least that many. And interesting enough, they all prepare one.
Well, certainly, I think there's something we want to discuss with Jim and see what kind of direction or how he thinks we ought to go about starting to try to implement that. But this is obviously something that would be very useful and beneficial for what we're trying to do in each of the subcommittees, and really as the board is charged to do for the state. And so I think this sounds like a pretty interesting topic to begin to address in 23.
I agree with that, and I'm probably being a little naive here, but it seems to me the committee could pretty easily pull together a recommendation around this and lay out all the benefits. And if you think about Jim, it doesn't make sense for him to be accountable in title, but not in practice. And also, when you think about, if you just played the cybersecurity card about that increasing threat and how important it is for everyone to be, acting consistently around some key things at the direction of the state CIO. I mean, could Jim not take that forward? Like have something from the committee and make a proposal? To me, it just seems very logical. Like, I don't know why this would need to be some big project, but again, I certainly don't have visibility or understanding of how all these different agencies coordinate and work together, but it just seems so straightforward to me.
Well, and we've got resources in the group, Joe, like yourself, that folks that are CIOs and or have been CIOs that get the organizational structure and how to get things accomplished. And I would say everybody can disagree and throw things at me later, but working in and around government for basically my whole life in different roles, one of the great flaws of the efficiency and effectiveness is that you get assigned the responsibility, but you don't have the authority to affect the outcomes. And organizational structure and alignment impacts that.
Yep.
I'm just going to chime in to say, I think that the first piece of that, though, is to do a level set on where things actually are, because there seems to be some misperceptions about where funding currently sits and where positions sit, because for many agencies, their funding and their positions were transferred to DIT. And so,
Amen.
Some of us do not have any control over our IT, a lot of what happens in the IT space for our agencies. So I just want to be clear about that.
And maybe that's, for us to think about as the first step at a very, very, very high level, 50,000 foot level, is a quick gap analysis, right? Where are we today? What is point A? What is current state? Most of us were sitting here talking, don't know exactly, but could we document that org chart? And the org chart's different than what gets drawn versus how it actually operates, right? What's today? Then where are we potentially, based on recommendations, what's the future state look like, right? And then somebody can worry about at some point, what's the migration path from current state to future state, right? Not magic, and it's classic stuff all of us have been through in different phases of our work.
So this is Sarah. I wish that Jim were here for this conversation. I think, yes, we can provide current state. And part of why you guys in the report, part of the recommendation was understanding the portfolio and understanding IT spend and where the money is and who has access to what. That was part of the reason for those recommendations. But we can certainly circle back with Jim and figure out a reasonable approach to how to get this information to you guys.
I mean, the bottom line initiative is to make Jim the czar of all IT in the state of North Carolina.
Yeah, okay, you'll win with that philosophy. Comments, suggestions, anyone?
Yeah, I was just going to, this is Tracy, just going to add, picking up on the comments from Joe about, making a case for this. It seems to me that if or as we were to do that, one of the important pieces to include would be around the development and the effectiveness and the career paths and ladders for IT personnel, if there is that tighter connection. Because translating my experience is at a university, if you've got just a smallish number of IT people supporting a unit or a function, then they become isolated. They don't have the IT peers and professionals to bounce ideas off of to help to continue to develop them. So I think not only is there a piece about the efficacy of the state and its activities by doing so, there's also a piece about the retention and the improvement of the experience for the state employees, that in these days of talent wars, right, and mobility of people to take other roles, that becomes important if they're in a bigger workforce.
That's a great point, Tracy.
Yeah. Anyone else with additional comments? Well, and obviously this brainstorming piece is something that's fluid and can continue to evolve. I'm sure that there'll be some other things that can come up in the coming months that we may add to this as well. But I will look to talk to Jim about this part. Okay, what's next with our agenda?
So the last item on the agenda is other business, which is allowing any board members to bring up new business that may have been covered in the brainstorming. But
again, folks, this is the opportunity to speak up. There being no further. It looks like that we're going to be able to wrap up a little early today. I'm sure folks have holiday plans, and that's great.
So Merry Christmas to everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Happy holidays.
Yeah, great seeing you.
Yes, Merry Christmas to all. Our next meeting is March 17. Is that correct here?
yes, March 17th would be the next full board meeting. The committees would have meetings in January and February as well. And the calendar invites should be going out soon so that you all can mark your calendars.
Great,
Thank you.
good. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for attending. Have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye now.